right. If you've been anxiously following our self-promotional activities on the Twitter industrial complex, you know it's a big, big day here at Curse of Politics Worldwide headquarters. Because with Jenny going off to do Poiliev things, we found ourselves in the position of needing to bring in a special guest to join Scott and I on the pod. Our selection criteria were a pretty high bar. We needed somebody who is smart. We needed somebody who's funny. Somebody who has campaign experience at the most senior levels and isn't afraid to tell the stories. And most importantly, someone who will tell Scott where to go right out of the chute. And that somebody, you happily miserable accursed, is current no bullshitter, former Premier of BC for over 6 years, retiring from public life in 2017 as the longest-serving female Premier in Canadian history, Christy Clark.
Hello. And Michelle Cadario was not available.
Christy, welcome to the Curse of Politics. It's great to have you here. It's a real thrill to have you here, actually.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it. I love Scott Herle.
You love Scott Herle. Yes, we've actually morphed over the course of the past 2 years into one person. We're a unified creature now.
Wow.
Looks like me, but I smoke. And just one thing. Christy, you look like, are you a prof now? You look like you're just, these are TA hours. Like it looks, you got like kind of a fancy assembled bookshelf behind you.
Yeah.
You look very casual, like you're kind of learned.
You want me, so I'm in a house that's like under renovation. So
awesome.
I had to, so you want to, I'll show you what I got also behind me.
Woo!
Nothing.
Very beautifully done.
Like literally nothing behind me. This is just like, I took every book that I could find in the place and put them in one spot.
Now, Christy, I don't know what you're going to do about this, but there's one selection criteria that we dropped, and it's kind of unfortunate because the Montreal Canadiens are finally giving Scott and I something to talk about, and now we can't really talk about it on this pod anymore.
Vancouver used to have a hockey team, right?
Yeah, Vancouver's got a hockey team again, Frank. I'll tell you, got a new coach. It's things are running along very smoothly. You know what though? I mean, every British Columbian loves the Canadians because of you've had a great goalie for a long time. He's out now, but you know.
You bet.
I'm just happy that I may actually get to someday wear my Cole Caulfield jersey. When he had one goal after 40 games, I maybe thought that I was just going to have to put that thing away. But Cole is back.
Don't you guys live in Toronto and Ottawa? Like,
doesn't really look like it, does it, David? There's a gibbon behind you. Where the fuck are you?
I'm in Costa Rica, and I'm visiting my brother who lives down here. I got to show you guys something because I'm renting a house from a couple from Nashville, and they left behind this button, and I love it more than I can tell you. It's a picture of Trump, and it says, "Does this ass make my country look small?"
Do my hands make this country look big?
All right, today on the pod, we have an Emergencies Act to talk about how the vote went down in the House, what measures are appropriate here, what's overreach. We'll pull on all those threads. Recent polling is showing some divisions within Canada on the issue. We'll break all those numbers down. We'll do our cursed clipping. This week, it's Alexander Panetta's CBC piece on the American right wing's latest punching bag, Justin Trudeau. And as always, we'll end this thing with our Hey Yous. History will record this as Christy Clark's very first Hey You. So stick around for that. Wow. All right, so the Emergency Act passed the House. We'll get to the political implications of it in a second, but I'm interested in what you think about the use of the act in this circumstance. Scott, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think I may have said this last week. My take is that it was probably motivated as much by the financial measures. Like I really think as much as diesel, the fuel of this whole thing, the occupation in Ottawa was finance. And I think that it seems to me, just the way that they've spoken and the hints that have been dropped, it feels to me like they must have intel that suggests to them that there's been a pretty significant flow of funds from sort of, dark money across the border, foreign reserve. And I don't know if any of that's true, or I don't know how much of it's true, or I don't know if it's hyped up to create political cover or not. But at least for that reason, I think, it was justified. And look, I just look at it this way. I mean, people can say, well, gosh, the Israelites made it out of Egypt. So what did Moses need all those plagues for? Well, I think they made it out of Egypt because of those fucking plagues. And I think that, we didn't have the Emergencies Act for a long time. Then we had it, and that weekend was cleaned out. So the police chief said that he needed it and couldn't have got the job done without it. So I assume that in substance it's needed. I just hope that it's halted soon. And I hope that the government is extraordinarily cautious and careful and prudent in its use of these authorities, because they'll be giving a gift to their opponents if there's abuse of these powers.
Christy, can you do better than that dubious historical analogy?
I don't know.
God, what's wrong with the Old Testament? What are you, a non-believer?
Exactly.
Burning bush, rivers of blood, locusts. Come on.
Okay. Where do you stand on the 10 Commandments, Herle? I don't want to know. I would. So I take a little bit of. I take a different view of that. I don't think the Emergency Act was necessary. We have all the laws in place that we need to be able to have gotten this done. But they, I think from the very beginning, the government was, they were really provocative, unnecessarily provocative with the truckers. I don't support the truckers. I don't support the anti-vax folks. I don't support any of that stuff. But I think they were obnoxious and all the rest of that. But I do think that there's no doubt we have the laws in Canada to be able to deal with this. You don't need to bring in emergency powers. I think the government just let it simmer for so long, let it get out of hand. The police chief wasn't doing what people had hoped he would do. And so they decided to step in with this really heavy-handed tool, which has never been used, and I don't think should have been used in this case. And part of that was perhaps necessity because they'd let it simmer for so long. But I think more of it was just political. They wanted to look like tough guys. And they said, well, what's the biggest hammer we have so we can look as tough as we possibly can? And that's how we ended up with the Emergency Powers Act. But I think Scott and I would probably definitely agree that the part of the act that allows them to extract financial penalties on people, reaching out to private sector banks and lenders and saying, we want you to cut off the credit cards. We want to make sure that people can't provide for their families. I mean, none of these people have even been tried in a court of law. There's been they were just there. I mean, I'm sure there's a variety of people between the most obnoxious Nazi flag waving, bad guys and the average yoga instructor guy that owns a yoga business in Toronto who happened to be there.
Oh, no. We don't agree.
I thought the Brienne of Chilliwack exposed this whole thing because haven't either the government or the RCMP said they're only going after people who were integral to the operation. They're not going after just an average $50 donor or somebody that wandered by Parliament Hill to blow an air horn. They're only going after the main people.
The problem with the Emergencies Act, I mean, this is the reason, this is the law, the tool that should not have been used, is it does give the government the power to do this to everybody that was there if they choose to. I mean, it's an offense to civil liberties to bring it in. We have the law for a reason. Sometimes it is necessary, but for heaven's sakes, this wasn't espionage. It wasn't the kinds of crimes that are contemplated by the act. And there were other laws available to do all of these things that they needed to do. And
it does seem weird to have to go to 11 on something like this, like 150. What?
Well, I mean, Christy says, well, they brought out a big hammer. Maybe the problem is the federal government's like you, David. It only has a big hammer. You know what I mean there, big guy? Honestly, what do they have in between? Like, it seems like they were either sitting by saying we're going to lend resources and do everything we can to be supportive, which after 21 days felt like a pretty feckless goddamn response, or they introduced the Emergencies Act. It didn't really feel like they had other cards in their deck to play. And I think maybe that gap kind of got exposed at the federal level with the separation of powers. And you add to that the complicated factor that the political level can't direct policing. I don't know that there was a ton that they had to do. And but I want to go back to the financing thing. I don't agree with Christy. Like, I do think that it makes sense and it's warranted to use it. Or to create the authority. I just want them to use it with extraordinary caution. And I want to make certain there's a lot of scrutiny. And to that end, I actually think the government and the RCMP did something this week that I think is unusual, and I'm glad they did it. And that is, they kind of self-reported. It's your Brienne example, right? Like, it's not frequent that they will come out and say, this is what we are doing. This is what we're not doing. This is how many bank accounts have been done. This is how many warrants effectively, or whatever you would call it. This is how many intrusions we're making. I like that level of information. I think that's reassuring. It tells us that they are being tempered, let's hope. And I hope that's a precedent that they've established, that as long as this act is employed, they'll continue to update us on those numbers and tell us what they're doing, and more importantly, what they're not. Because I don't know that they didn't need this authority, but I don't want them to abuse it.
Christy, there's a report out, and I don't know if it's true or not, so let's not assume it's true for the conversation, that 1,100 people who donated to this protest also donated to January 6th. Okay?
Yeah.
In the States. If that were true, would that change your opinion?
Well, okay, first, I think we should, when you have to say, I'm okay with government having these powers as long as they don't, I'm just going to have to trust them to use them wisely. That's a signal we should pay attention to. So that's one, I mean, that's the issue with this act always, and it's why it's never been used. But I think, to your question specifically, I think we should be thinking hard about foreign money that is coming into Canada. And Western Canadians have been talking about this for a long time. Alberta had a report on it. And the federal government said, we don't really care. They just sort of breezed by the thing. But we do know that foreign money has been flooding into Canada to support protest groups, particularly in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan. And we saw while the Tucker's protest was going on just 4 days ago, we saw 20 masked protesters with axes attack workers on the Coastal Gas Pipeline, attempting, according to the RCMP, to light one of those vehicles on fire while there were two people in it. RCMP officers were attacked. Some were injured. There were nails on tar-covered paper on the road to pierce people's. They'd thrown a bus across the road to stop the police from being able to get in while they mounted their attack. These groups, we know, are funded out from outside the country as well as within. We know that many of these people have GoFundMe pages. And so if we need the Emergencies Act, why doesn't it ever get applied to some of where there is real violence unfolding quite regularly in Western Canada? And if we don't need the Emergencies Act because we have a law to deal with it, which I think we do, then why don't they use the law in Ontario too, in Ottawa? I just don't think that there's any consistency in the application of the process here.
Well, Scott, it's an interesting question that Christy raises, because a lot of people here are applying what our friend Ellie Alboim would call situational ethics. Okay? We don't like what these people are protesting, so we think those protests should stop and be shut down. What happens when protests happen that we do agree with, but other people don't agree with in the country? So there is a bit of a precedent issue here, isn't there?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's a precedent issue. It depends on what you think triggers the precedent. So for sure, people employ situational ethics. And, I would throw it right back at the other side. Not at Christy, but I would throw it back, particularly at the federal conservatives who stood in the House and talked about, where was the prime minister on this and that? Well, when protesters were blocking the railways, the prime minister said, it's time to go. You got to go. When the pipeline was being held hostage, the prime minister said after 36 hours, I don't think this is right. You should stand down and we need to resolve this. I think I think we need to pull the licorice whips apart here, right? So, first of all, on the foreign funding issue, that's a legitimate issue and it should be scrutinized. But, come on. Kenny called that inquiry. It turned out to be complete hogwash. It showed nothing other than it revealed him to be obviously politically motivated and sort of silly. If people are donating in a legitimate, transparent fashion, then fine.
I've been retained by the Rockefeller Foundation to do work on climate change in Canada.
Yeah. And I've done work for the Oak Foundation, not in 10 years, but I had in the past. There's nothing wrong with that. But if there's, and I don't know that there's anything wrong with people, making contributions to this thing, depending upon, now that it's been declared, illegal, then you got to deal with it. Well, that's why I say it needs to be done with care. But I don't really find that with respect to the violence that Christy you're talking about, I'm 100% with you. I'm not being situational. As far as I don't know that requires the Emergencies Act, because it's not an occupation of a downtown city core for 3 weeks. If it happened in Calgary or Regina, I would be all for it in the same way. But it needs to be dealt with by police forces. People need to be able to feel secure in their workplace. That property needs to be able to be secure. It doesn't matter how sympathetic I am or am not to those that are perpetrating it. If it's a crime, then you get arrested and you suffer the consequences.
Well, I do think if the government is genuinely concerned about foreign money coming into Canada to support protests, they really, it will be situational ethics if they only apply a look into it to what happened in Ottawa and at the Ambassador Bridge, because it really deserves to be. Because if people in Ottawa and, Scott, I think is in this group, think that this is all BS, that's all been invented by right-wing oil supporting premiers, then they could, I think that we deserve the right, people in the West deserve the right to prove you're wrong on that.
What was Kenny's
really
exercise?
Have a full look at it, right? Because it's not just, we don't want foreign money coming into Canada to support the kind of things that happened at the pipeline, where you got 2 workers who could have been killed.
Well, obviously, I would never cheer anything like that. But on this issue of looking at it, Kenny called an inquiry. He set up an entire apparatus to investigate it, and he found the square root of sweet fuck all. Doesn't that give you the answer you just said you're looking for?
No, because he didn't. That's not what they found, Scott. But you know what? If you and I disagree about that, we have a great opportunity to resolve it, which is the feds are apparently finally seized with this issue, because there's all this foreign money coming in to support anti-COVID protesters in the city where they live and work. Well, okay, that was a bad thing. I'm glad they want to look into that. We don't want that to happen. Let's have it be a national look at what's going on across the country. And then perhaps we'll get to find out if somebody does the real work on it, somebody credible, in the eyes of decision makers in Ottawa, we'll get a real answer to it.
It's foreign money. If David comes back soon, he'll be bringing foreign money. Look at him.
I've got to tell you, the phrase now or never has been cheapened by volume usage. It's misused everywhere. My personal favorite was for a men's hair replacement product. Herle Burleyites, how is a hair weave now or never? Of course, the opposite is also true. When you have a situation where it really applies, now or never takes on extra meaning. Precisely the point of this next part of the story from our presenting sponsor Telus on how we get high-speed 5G wireless connectivity right across all of Canada, not just in the big cities, but all rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. We're on Chapter 5, the urgency of now, the consequences of never. Right now, the feds are holding public consultations on the best way to auction a new, critical mid-band of 5G spectrum, which can carry reams of data over very long distances and make connectivity so much faster. Telus believes a 100 megahertz caps policy is the answer, because it would result in 4 different carriers having enough of that spectrum to launch their 5G networks equally in every market. The urgency to invest would be heightened for each, and they'd have to compete aggressively on service. And here's why the stakes for speed couldn't be higher. As we emerge from this pandemic, we're in a race with the rest of the world, Europe, Asia, everywhere, to leverage technologies and gain the most advantage for our innovation economies. Simply put, faster deployment of 5G to every single household will help Canada compete. When you think of the benefits for all Canadians, it's existential stuff. Healthcare innovation and faster, broader access. Increased entrepreneurship and the ability to do business from anywhere. Dramatically expanded opportunities for online learning. And next generation, precision agriculture technology that helps in the fight against climate change. Hurly-burlyites, we simply can't wait for this. Getting left in the 5G dust now means we never catch up. The story continues next week, but you can have your say right now at telus.com/get5G-right. Hey, let's talk some politics here.
Yeah.
I'm puzzled about something. Why do the conservatives
my hammer
think
joke?
they're
Was it my hammer joke? I was trying to be respectful and complimentary, David.
I know. Look at the size of his hands.
Why do the conservatives think they're really onto something here when the polls show that 2/3 or more of Canadians opposed the protests? Are they using this to animate the base and raise money? And if that's what it's for, are they going to be able to pivot away from their position on this before a general election? Or do they even want to pivot away from this? Or do they want to run on this kind of stuff? None of us are conservatives and members of the Conservative Party, so we are not privy to their thinking. But what do we think they're thinking?
I think they're thinking, and assuming that Poilievre wins, and I think Jenny's so smart, she's going to make sure he gets elected there. I think they're thinking they can do what Justin Trudeau did, which is win with 35% of the vote. You don't need, this is why I'm politically homeless, David, is because I look around and I see politicians who think it's good enough to represent just the cities or just mostly men or just mostly this or that. They chop up the electorate into groups, small enough slices, and then decide how many slices they want and say to hell with everybody else. And so you've got Trudeau did that in the last two elections, winning with the smallest plurality of any prime minister in Canadian history. Poilievre is going to, I think, is ripping a page from Trudeau's playbook. I don't think they care, either of them, about representing the majority of Canadians as much as they just care about cobbling together enough seats to get in government. I think is a tragedy, because I think those days where Brian Mulroney, Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin would talk about how proud they were to represent the whole country and the things that bound us together as Canadians, those are the days that I miss.
Just as a advertorial, anybody who agrees with Christy or is interested in the point that Christy just made, please go to the Hurly-burly interview with Joe Clark, who spent a fair bit of time talking about the role national political parties used to play in unifying the country and the role they now play in dividing it. Scott.
Yeah, it was a great pod, by the way. It was a really fantastic discussion. Congrats, David. It was really fun to listen to. I agree with much of what Christy said. I really strong, and we've talked about this before, David. This has been a bugaboo of yours and mine for a while. I think, the dominant trend in politics overall, from a professional standpoint, is micro-targeting, micro-motivation. So there isn't one big message that you say, well, this could scoop up 46% of the population, motivate them, get them behind us, and then we squeak out 39 and we end up winning a majority government. It has transformed this into this, like, we'll take 4 and 6 and 7% slices, and we'll talk to them about basic income, or we'll talk to them about fears about inflation, and we'll motivate that, attach them to us, create a loyalty. Then we staple them all together at the ballot booth like a Frankenstein monster of the electorate, and it gives us a result. So I do think that if they look at it and they go, well, the name of the game these days, you get to 33, 34, 35, you can win an election, you can form a government. So I don't think they're intimidated by the numbers we see. I also think
in the face of almost universal mainstream media condemnation?
Well, I think that's what I think all of it's going to get put to the test. I think there's another factor that's happening that is of the right. I think you look at Trump, you look at Duarte, Bolsonaro, you look at Johnson. Populism, bare-fanged populism, has become the dominant trend among conservatism as an electoral device, right? How do you get elected, right? You feed people's grievances back to them. You use social media to raise money and raise tempers off of it. And then you squeak out enough. And you hope in the midst of a campaign that the clarity of your position, the hyper motivation of your base, which, by the way, tends to be people that are willing to vote, combined with couple bounces your way, some weakness on the other side, and you squeak out a win. And so, I think the Poilievre, the turn that we've seen with the Conservative Party that was on display during the convoy. Pierre's going to be elected leader. They're going to choose populism in a heavy way. I oppose that in the most strenuous of ways. But I'm not so smug as to imagine that it's failed, that it's doomed to fail. And I know a ton of people. I wander around, and people, the other side has a part to play in this. If you're the smug downtown management consultancy elite snot that the other side says you are, well, you're helping your opponents. And don't bet against Poilievre at this point. Instead, get to work and make sure you beat him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's think for a second about what a train actually is. I mean, beyond the obvious. A train is a machine cunningly engineered to take advantage of the laws of physics as they relate to relatively frictionless steel-on-steel contact. It's the most efficient means of transporting mass cargo ever invented. Nothing else comes close. It has also come to mean unstoppable. In English, the term freight train is almost more of a simile than a noun. But our sponsor, CN, would like to point out a few realities. A modern train is a vastly complicated assemblage of moving parts. A thing that big, and it is one of the biggest things on Earth, must roll safely. It must be reliably stoppable. In Canada, that means accounting for some of the harshest weather anywhere, the increasingly ferocious heat of our summers, and levels of cold that would quickly paralyze most normal machinery. So, a CN train is almost over-engineered, packed with technology and operated under strict rules. In winter, right now, that requires constant vigilance against the damage snow, ice, and frigidity is capable of inflicting on tracks, machinery, and performance. Take braking, which sort of has to be beyond excellent to deal with the inertia of a moving train. Because deep cold attacks hoses and couplings, keeping air pressure even is critical. CN ensures vulnerable parts are scrutinized and replaced constantly, and the railway uses special cars designed to amplify and regulate pressure along the entire length of the train. In extremely cold weather, trains are shortened and they slow down. It happens. There's simply no other way to ensure safe, reliable operation. CN cannot allow any compromise where safety is concerned. But compared to other methods of heavy transport, say big trucks or ocean-going container ships, trains are still the champions of efficiency and reliability. That hasn't changed in 100 years, and it won't. Okay, Frank Graves gave us of Ecos Research, gave us a profile this weekend over Twitter of those people in Canada who support the protesters. Among the entire population of Canada, it was only 23% who said they agreed with the protesters in Ottawa. But there were big differences between men and women. There were big differences by age, income, and education. There were big differences between large urban and the rest. The net is that most non-urban, middle-aged, middle-income men support these protests. How much should we care about that?
Well, I think the system has been characterized. Women are voting differently from men for a long time. I mean, you certainly see that, right? Women tend to be attracted to politicians that are talking about healthcare, education, things like that. Not that men don't care about those things, but the hard economic message, the hard, going, that does appeal, I think, to men more. I mean, and David, you've certainly exposed that in a lot of the polling you've done over the years. I think in this case, though, and I have kind of a focus group that I go to, which is my book club. I have to say they're solidly middle class, so not economically representative, but really from a whole bunch of different professions and different stages of life. You know what they hate? They hate the chaos. They hate everybody's yelling and screaming. Can you just make it stop? Shut up, kids. We're tired of this. Can we please get on with business here? And I think what women would say is, kind of what I'm hearing from women is, first of all this chaos is ridiculous. We should just get on with it. COVID's, why are you all complaining here? And then on the other hand, looking at the government and saying, come on, people, why did you allow this to happen? So I don't necessarily think Trudeau's going to benefit from all this having been tough on it, and you resolved it after sitting around for a few days and letting it fester. I think it's going to be bad for him too, because I think that women don't like all this mess, which seems like such a distraction from all the real things that we need to look after. That's kind of a female perspective.
One of the things that's been lost in all of this tumult of the last number of years is most people don't like politics very much, and they don't want this much politics in their life.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to think about politics every day.
But the populace, like, as a matter of, like, chaos is a strategy. The populace understand that. They understand that people don't want that much politics in their life. They understand that it actually aggravates and agitates people. And so chaos is a strategy insofar as it can be helpful in terms of determining the voter pool for them. Because if there's enough chaos and anger and just ferment, then it turns off whole large portions of people, and they say, well, none of this is going to make any difference anyway. Fuck it. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't like any of the pox on all their houses. And if you can elevate your animated, angry core, well, then that might give you obviously a numeric advantage. I saw Frank's polling, and you're the pollster, David, but my take is, yes, you can find demographic, yes, you can find geographic, and yes, you can find socioeconomic cleavages. But and again, I think this is all part of where we're headed. I think it's all of those things, but it's all that glommed together into something more, which is why I think it's a cultural issue. And I think that it amounts to culture. And I think the consequence
Scott, that group of people, that non-large urban, middle income, middle-aged man thinks that society is changing rapidly around them, and that every one of those changes hurts them. Every one of those changes is against them.
Motivated by a fear of loss, a fear of losing position, privilege, power, all that kind of stuff. I know I sound like, I'm a York University left-wing academic, but I do think the fear turns into anger, the anger turns into a reliable vote. And I guess I'm working on a piece now that I'm going to crank out somewhere, but I think that the consequence of the past 3 weeks, COVID, the restrictions it imposed, the frustrations that created, the convoy and the occupation of Ottawa for 3 weeks, and the Conservative Party's mid-occupation clear choice to become a party of populist grievance. I think all that means that we're going to have a culture war election. It's inevitable. It's going to be a culture war election in the parlance of the United States, where the right have said that's what we want. We want the culture war politics. We want that format. We want that format in chaos. We want that anger, because it turns off people that might be more softly inclined to the other side and helps razor up our guys.
Christy, I'm super interested in what you have to say about this, because as leader of the BC Liberal Party, you have so much experience at trying to straddle some of these divides and trying to, right? So,
we had to say, my message to everybody was, look, if you want to run for us, we know we disagree on tons of stuff, on the culture, what's now defined as culture stuff, abortion, gay rights, transgender bathrooms, whatever it happens to be. We're not talking about that. And that is not on our agenda. We're not changing the laws. This is not about those things. This is about the economy, stupid. That's what we're focusing on. So if you care about the economy and that's what you want to talk about, run with us. You want to talk about other things, go do something else. Now, but I don't think that it's, we could leave this conversation and characterize this as populism and culture wars as a discussion that exists only on the right, because we certainly see it thriving on the left. And, you look at all of in the Democrats in the United States, you look at AOC and her crew of people, they're conducting a culture war as well. You see culture wars playing out on university campuses, huge, big letters all over the United States. There's a provocation on both sides that's happening, and they both want it. That's the problem. And the sort of the center, poor old Joe Biden, has been left there with all of his honorable intentions and his ancient history of being able to negotiate with people, kind of the last guy standing in the middle saying, well, wait a minute, there's nobody to talk to, because my own party doesn't want to talk and my enemies don't want to talk. And
there's a lot. I think there's a lot in that. The aggressive, impatient equity agenda is pushing a conservative backlash.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that Trudeau's response to this, saying these are, your views are unacceptable to me, really fuels the anger. It gives ammunition to the right to really, because it gives them something with which to take issue and with which to start a war. I mean, it's the kernels of it, right? So both sides play a really important role in keeping this culture war going. And I would never have thought Canada would go in this direction. I always thought that our institutions were stronger than this, and they've turned out to be failing.
I think it's more complex though than just saying, well, it's it's coming from both sides. That is an indisputable fact. But I think a couple things. One, it started with the left. I mean, really, if you think about the politics of identity, which is what culture was in the political context before we called it culture. I mean, it was identity politics. And in the 1980s, it condemned the Democratic Party to a minority position where they were infighting with one another and were having these, and they had to move eventually and rebuild their coalition. And as always, they did it through, a shift in leadership. But I think even though that kind of politics exists, I think the global trend, what makes this inevitable as a culture war election, I think, is that the right have figured out that this stuff can be professionalized and utilized in a way that doesn't just limit them. On the left, it tends to limit you. You can't get elected. On the right, I think they've figured out, actually, we can ride this to political success. And then what happens is, and this is going to be Trudeau's challenge, then you got to decide how you respond to that. Like if you've got that on the other side, you have to say, well, then do I go AOC or do I go something more mainstream as my response? And I think that there's a real challenge on the part for the federal Liberals. They've got to
Let's talk about the federal Liberals here, Scott.
Yeah, they got to disentangle this thing. They got to do better.
Let's talk about this. There were two polls out in the last few days. They had a wide difference on what the Conservative vote was. One said 39, one said 33. They didn't differ at all on the Liberal vote. One said 30, the other one said 29.5. What the fuck is going on with the Liberal Party?
Scott?
Well, I think it's failing. I think that it's failing to broaden its coalition. I think it got addicted to the micro slicing that we talked about. And on the one level, at the ground, that's what it got addicted to that. And at the highest level, in terms of political communication, it just got stuck and stopped at a sort of values level. And that takes you into a shorthand of, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm superior, you're not. And that's as much fuel for the other side as it is for your own guys. And so, I don't blame the convoy in the way some people do on Trudeau, but I do think that the response to this and the preparation for the next election, I think Trudeau has to stay because he's the best asset they have, and he's the best political asset they have, dented and damaged even though he is. And second, and I don't like the alternatives in terms of how they line up on this stuff. I don't think Chrystia Freeland is going to be a good standard bearer in a culture war campaign. And secondly, I think Trudeau's got to be a lot better, like a fucking lot better. And I think that he's got to strike a different tone, figure out how to bring more people in. He's got to add to that coalition. They act like they're still living off the fumes of 2015, and if they lose 1 or 2% per election, they can still squeak through. That can't be the way you approach this thing. You're going to take yourself down below 30 and you're going to lose.
I think you're asking him to be somebody he isn't. Christy,
I think that's true. And I think, when we talk about culture wars, I think we're too limited. We're just thinking about it in terms of identity politics and, what's your identity? It's actually, for the Trudeau Liberals, it's been a much broader push to the left around, they've been speaking to people who care about climate change, environmental issues, anti-pipeline people. They've been talking, it's for that, for them, that party moving to the left has been about trying to eat up all those new Democrat voters that are out there and get them into their coalition. So it's really left the center kind of empty in Canadian politics as they've done that. And I don't know if they're weakening on the left, but I think what's actually happening is that those people who at the center who used to vote for Trudeau are now we're finding ourselves completely politically without anywhere to go because he's moved so far out of the mainstream. The economy is failing. The debt is growing. We worry about the inheritance for our children and our ability to be able to continue to afford healthcare. And we think we have no political home that cares about that anymore. And I think that's what you're sort of seeing happen to Trudeau. And I also think, though, too, and this is, nothing against the man himself, but people just get tired of politicians after they've been around a while, especially in a 24/7 news cycle. And I think Trudeau people are done, finished with him. They're ready to move on. It may be right, Scott, that they don't have a better replacement for him, but he can't be the best product they have on the shelf to put forward for the next election.
Well,
I want to make a joke about people not getting tired about you, but I don't think I can pull it off, make it funny, make it accurate, and not get people hating me, including you. So I'm just going to put that off to the side. I'll come back to it.
So it wouldn't have been a joke. It would have been an insult. Is that what
I think that's how it would have run. I think it would have ended up that way. That's most of my jokes.
You know what I fucking hate? I hate the fact that I hate proportional representation. And I think this is pushing us inevitably toward proportional representation. Because you can't give majority governments to people who get 30% of the vote. It's not legitimate.
Yeah. Single transferable vote, David. Proportional representation gives too much power to the guys in the back room like you. You get to choose off a list of all your pals. The next thing you know, Scott Reid's the prime minister. That's not okay with anybody.
Let me tell you, some things are going to change around here. I hope you like scotch, rye whiskey, and hockey. Can I just, the antidote to a bunch of what we were saying there, Christy, and you're rhyming off, you're talking about the prime minister, and you're talking about the voter coalition he's built, and the limits of the appeal and so forth. And I agree with that. But I think the economy could be the antidote to that. I think there's been such indifference to economic matters from this government, and saying, all right, we're now confronted with interest rates that are going to be rising, supply chain problems that we have no idea if they're going to go away, inflation, wage inflation. I think that, and you talk about the fear of loss of position that's fueling some of this anger, and that's behind the convoy and behind some of the support of the convoy, even those that don't support their actions. Like, to me, an economic focus that seems encompassing, that brings people together. It says, listen, we're not trying to actually put people out of work. We're trying to put people into jobs. And I think that's the answer. Like, an elevated effort on the part of Trudeau to have a good, common sense, straightforward economic program. I think that could box some of this political compass.
Has the prime minister ever been able to talk competently, clearly about economic issues? I would argue no. I have never heard him do it. I've heard him talk about the environment, climate change with great fluidity. Which is great. I've heard him talk about identity politics. I've heard him talk about issues in Quebec. I have rarely ever heard him with any coherence, talk about economic growth, paying down debt, the relationship between taxation and productivity, all those things that people like Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien, Brian Mulroney were totally fluent on. I feel like he missed those grades in high school.
They, however, could not explain quantum physics to you.
That's true.
Christy, when David and I send in those letters to the PMO, they just crumple them up and say, those fucking Martin guys, on and on and on with the goddamn economic update PowerPoints. They think they reinvented the world in 1995. Fuck them. So I hope you're wrong, because I do think that it's actually, I think it's vital to busting up this dam that we're headed toward.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's we are so unproductive as an economy. We are such a small country. We can't manage this burden of debt that we have. We're talking about expanding social programs rather than trying to manage them better. All of that is a recipe for certain decline as a country. And we've got kids that are going to grow up with that. In my case, there's fewer kids than there are parents in terms of future taxpayers. So I think we've got to, the problem is people may not see that yet, right?
So my productivity is low also, not just the country's, my personal productivity.
That's all the margaritas, David.
You're wearing sandals.
Yeah.
But I did find us a cursed clipping this week, and it comes, as we said in the intro, via Alex Panetta from CBC News. Let me read just a segment of it to our listeners. Imagine the entire national government of Canada becoming an object of polarization, disdained and detested by one half of the major political parties in the United States. We need not imagine it anymore. A swath of the American public now bubbles with enmity toward Canada's Prime Minister and delights in mockery. Justin Trudeau is now a beloved punching bag on Fox News, and Republican politicians have taken their swings, with an unforeseen plot twist being that the political party of former President Donald Trump now accuses Canada of authoritarianism. Former White House official Brett Bruin said he wouldn't be surprised to see Trudeau appearing in Republican election ads this year. Does that matter in Canada?
I think Trudeau should play those ads. It'll be great for him. I mean, in Canada. I mean, what's better for a Canadian prime minister than to be
That's what I was wondering,
by the fringe element in the United States? Wow, it's instant credibility. And you know what? I think Canadians always say, he might be a schmuck, but he's our schmuck, And right. I think that would actually be a great political gift for Justin.
Yeah, I think there's milk in that carton, but I think you got to be careful. I just go back to the same point I was making. I think for the Trudeau guys, they got to be really careful to not become guilty of being the thing that their opponents suggest. So if they're emboldened by that kind of thing, if Trudeau becomes the the global target of the anti-elite anger mob, he's got to be careful not to try to wear it too much as a badge of courage, a badge of honor. He's got to come back and he can't just govern as AOC, and say, okay, well then I'm golden here and get a load of me. I'm right and you're wrong. And there's too much either in words, deeds, or tone of I'm right and you're wrong. So fucking get with the program. You can't have that. We're going to because it's going to feed the other side. This is an O'Toole. Pierre won't shiv halfway through the campaign and decide he's going to drop this or try to navigate that, right? These guys will go hard on that stuff. And you've got to change the ball court that you're playing on with that guy, or you may not like it. So I like this thing in a way, but I don't become a caricature of yourself.
Totally agree with Scott on that.
Okay. All right. So we've had a really good outing for our first session between the three of us. Christy, you're fitting in like the glove on O.J. Simpson's hand.
Back to the hands.
Back to the hands. It's time for our Hey Yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Scott, do you want to start us off with your Hey You for this week?
Sure. We kind of touched on it earlier, and I touched on it last week. So this is a rare repeat Hey You. Last week, I made the point that in my Hey You, that if we're going to go down this road with the Emergencies Act, that they needed to be very careful. Chrystia Freeland, Marco Mendicino, Bill Blair, Lametti, whoever's involved in this, you got to be very careful when it comes to the financial measures. I want to call out, my Hey You is actually in praise. I mentioned this earlier. We've seen some transparency this week, somewhat atypical transparency, particularly when it comes to a so-called police operation, talking about how many bank accounts, talking about what the deadlines were, talking about the nature of what is being frozen, what won't be frozen, all that. Keep that going. Do it again. It's only Tuesday. Do it twice more this week. Then do it next week. Then tell us you're closing the gate on the Emergencies Act and you're not going to keep it for the full 30 days. But keep this going. That is a reassurance. It allows that a sense, okay, well, this is being stewarded in a responsible manner. It allows that to prevail, and it snuffs out the flame of anxiety and conspiracy when people say, I sent in $50 to, the Lawrence Bulk fan club, and now, they've seized my RSPs.
Scott's had more provocative Hey Yous, Christy. What is your first inaugural Hey You for the
to call out to somebody and say they did a good job, you mean?
No, call out to anybody. Tell them to do something. Criticize them.
So negative.
Okay.
Whatever.
Okay, here it is. I think Jean Charest should run for leader of the Conservative Party.
Oh,
I think
crazy
somebody who's a centrist, who understands the complexity of this country, who has had a strong grasp of the economy, who is going to talk about the things we have in common rather than things we should divide us, should lead a national party. I really worry about the institutions in Canada and our health of them. And I think our political parties are in failing health. And, you know, the Liberals are going to have to decide what they want to do about Justin Trudeau. But honestly, the Conservatives have a chance with a guy like Herle running for office, becoming their leader. We will at least have one party that is in the center, at least speaking to the majority of Canadians about things we share in common. So there's my hey you, Jean Charest, run for Conservative leader.
So, Christy, there isn't normally a follow-up to a hey you, but I'm super fascinated because normally what I hear from Conservatives is, why the fuck do we give a shit who Liberals think our leader should be? They vote Liberal, right? And so would you vote for Charest if he was the leader?
If he was running against Justin Trudeau?
Yeah.
You know, there's appeal there. I worked with him. I think he's really smart, really able. And I think he has a lot of what the country needs in terms of economic focus and, most importantly, a sense of national unity and what brings us together. But, you know, it's really, really, I've been a lifelong Liberal, David. So you can't make me say more than that.
Right. I hear you. I hear you.
Well, I like Jean. Hang on. I've worked with Jean, my follow-up, because I've worked with Jean, and I like him too. And for that reason, I beseech him not to run, because this party in its current constitution will rip the living shit out of him and leave him bleeding on the side of the highway. And I think that would be an ignominious end to his public career.
Yeah, but that is also likely true. My hey you goes out to the PMO. Hey, PMO. If the PM is going to sound on the Emergencies Act like he's been sounding, give him a timeout. Let some other people step forward to articulate the government rationale. In 1970, John Turner was the lead government spokesperson, not coincidentally a less polarizing figure than Pierre Trudeau was. This is becoming about Trudeau, and for the sake of the government and the party, that needs to change.
Right on.
Thank you, all you accursed, for listening to us today. Thank you, Christy Clark, for joining the Curse of Politics panel. This is going to be so great going forward. Looking forward to it. Doesn't mean we don't miss you, Jenny. Don't worry about it. But we're good here.
You are.
we're good. We're good here. And I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Telus, and our sponsor, CN Rail. And again, everybody for listening. And the three of us, we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thanks, guys.